99% of people destroy their prayers with one word. Joel Goldsmith discovered this through decades of spiritual healing work across 6 continents. This single word blocks every miracle, every healing, every manifestation you've ever tried to create. When you remove this word from your consciousness, everything changes in ways that will astonish you. The word is so common, so automatic, that you probably used it in your last prayer without realizing its devastating effect. It seems innocent, even necessary for proper prayer. But Joel called it the great destroyer of spiritual power, because it creates separation between you and the divine source, making your prayers bounce back empty and powerless. Tonight, I'll reveal this forbidden word and show you the mystical replacement that Joel used to heal thousands of people from terminal illnesses, financial ruin, and broken relationships. This isn't theory or wishful thinking. It's the practical secret that transformed ordinary people into powerful spiritual healers whose very presence brought miracles. Your prayer life will never be the same after tonight. Neither will your ability to demonstrate the healing consciousness that Jesus promised would be available to all who understand the true nature of spiritual power and divine connection. Before revealing the word, understand why this matters more than anything else you'll learn about prayer. Joel Goldsmith wasn't just teaching prayer technique, he was unveiling the consciousness of Christ itself, the same awareness that Jesus used to heal the sick and multiply loaves and fishes. Every word you speak in prayer either aligns you with divine power or separates you from it completely. This forbidden word creates what Joel called the sense of separation, the illusion that makes you believe you're here and God is somewhere else. It turns prayer into begging instead of recognition. It transforms your divine birthright into desperate pleading with a distant deity. The moment this word leaves your lips, you've stepped out of spiritual power and into human limitation. The mystics throughout history knew this secret and guarded it carefully. Jesus never used this word in his most powerful prayers. The great healers like Phineas Quimby, Mary Baker Eddy, and Emma Curtis Hopkins avoided it instinctively. Joel spent 40 years proving that removing this word unleashes miraculous healing power that seemed impossible before. This isn't just about getting better prayer results. This is about accessing the same consciousness that created the universe, the same mind that knows no limitation, lack, or impossibility. When you remove this word, you step into cosmic power. The word that destroys prayer is need. Every time you pray from need, you affirm lack exists in God's perfect creation. Every time you ask God to fill your need, you're declaring that something is missing from infinite perfection. Joel discovered that need-based prayer actually strengthens the very problems you're trying to solve by giving them reality and consciousness. Think about your recent prayers and notice the pattern. God, I need healing from this disease. I need money to pay these bills. I need love in my relationship. Each statement confirms separation from your good. You're telling the universe that God's abundance isn't already present as your very being. You're making yourself a beggar instead of recognizing your divine inheritance. Joel taught that God knows no need because God is complete perfection expressing itself eternally. When you pray from need, you're speaking a language God doesn't understand because need doesn't exist in divine consciousness. It's like trying to convince the sun that darkness exists while standing in broad daylight. The sun only knows light, and God only knows wholeness, completeness, and infinite abundance. Need-based prayer reinforces the very problems it seeks to solve. When you declare, I need healing, you're affirming that sickness is real and present. When you pray, I need money, you're confirming that lack exists in your experience. This creates more of what you don't want. Here's Joel's mystical replacement that changes everything about prayer and spiritual demonstration. Instead of praying from need, pray from recognition. Don't ask God to heal you. Recognize that in God's presence, there's no sickness to heal. Don't beg for abundance. Acknowledge that God's infinite supply is already expressing as your life right now in this very moment. Joel called this the prayer of recognition or the treatment of truth. You're not trying to change God's mind about your situation because God's mind is already made up in your favor. You're aligning your consciousness with what God already knows is true about you. You're remembering your spiritual identity instead of reinforcing human limitations and false beliefs. This shift from need to recognition transforms prayer from pleading into power. You're no longer asking God to do something for you. You're recognizing what God has already done as you. This is how Jesus multiplied loaves and fishes. This is how the great healers performed miracles that defied natural law. They recognized perfection where others saw problems and impossibilities. Recognition prayer works because consciousness is the only power that exists. What you recognize in consciousness must manifest as experience because there's nothing else but consciousness appearing as your world. When you recognize spiritual truth, that truth becomes your demonstrated experience. Sarah Mitchell discovered Joel's teaching during her darkest hour. Diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, doctors gave her 3 months to live. For weeks, she prayed desperately using every method she knew. God, I need healing. Please heal me. I need more time with my children. Her condition worsened rapidly. The more she begged, the weaker she became. Her need-based prayers were actually feeding the disease with spiritual energy. Then she found Joel's writings about recognition prayer in a used bookstore. Instead of asking for healing, she began recognizing, in God's presence there is no sickness. Perfect life is expressing as my being right now. I am the eternal life of God made manifest. She stopped affirming lack and started acknowledging wholeness. The shift felt strange, but immediately powerful. Within days, something fundamental changed in her consciousness. Fear dissolved into unshakable peace. Desperation transformed into quiet confidence. She wasn't begging anymore. She was remembering her true spiritual nature as the perfect life of God. This inner transformation preceded the physical healing that doctors called medically impossible. 6 months later, every trace of cancer had disappeared from her body. But Sarah knew the real miracle was the consciousness change that happened first. She had learned to see herself as God sees her, perfect, whole, and complete. The healing was simply the natural result of this recognition. Michael Rodriguez struggled with financial crisis for 7 years after losing his construction business. His prayers followed the same desperate pattern. God, I need money. Please send me abundance. I need help paying these bills. He attended every prosperity workshop, repeated every affirmation, followed every manifestation technique, but debt kept growing. His need-based consciousness was actually repelling the abundance he sought. After studying Joel's recognition method for 3 months, Michael changed his approach completely. Instead of affirming lack, he began recognizing, God's infinite supply is expressing perfectly as my life. Divine abundance is my natural state. I am the prosperity of spirit made visible. He stopped begging and started acknowledging his spiritual inheritance with unwavering faith. The external changes started subtly but accelerated quickly. Unexpected opportunities appeared from former clients. New income streams opened through connections he hadn't thought about in years. Within 6 months, his financial situation completely transformed. But the real miracle was internal. He no longer felt separate from abundance. Michael discovered that prosperity isn't something you get from God. It's something you recognize as your spiritual nature. When you stop needing abundance and start recognizing it as your divine inheritance, it flows naturally into your experience because there's nothing to block it. Elena Vasquez's marriage was falling apart after 23 years. Her husband had become distant and critical, threatening divorce. Her prayers were filled with need and desperation. God, I need my husband to change. I need him to love me again. I need our marriage to be saved. Every prayer reinforced the belief that something was wrong, that love was missing from her experience. The more she prayed from need, the more distant her husband became. Joel's recognition prayer revolutionized her entire approach to relationships. Instead of asking God to fix her marriage, she began recognizing, divine love is the only presence. Perfect love is expressing through every relationship. I am the love of God made manifest. She stopped trying to change her husband and started acknowledging love's eternal presence in their union. The transformation was remarkable and happened faster than she expected. As Elena's consciousness shifted from need to recognition, her husband began responding differently without any external pressure. Their interactions became more harmonious. Love returned naturally because Elena stopped affirming its absence. She recognized that divine love had never left. She had simply forgotten to see it. Within weeks, her husband apologized for his behavior and suggested they take a second honeymoon. But Elena knew the real healing had happened in her consciousness first. When she stopped needing love and started recognizing it, love had no choice but to appear in her experience. These stories aren't coincidences or lucky breaks. They're mathematical proof that Joel's recognition prayer works consistently when applied correctly. When you remove need from your consciousness, you align with God's knowing instead of human believing. You step into the same spiritual power that Jesus demonstrated, that every great mystic has accessed throughout history. The word need keeps you trapped in human limitation by affirming that something is missing from God's perfect creation. Recognition elevates you into divine consciousness, where nothing is missing, nothing needs fixing, and everything already exists in perfect order. This isn't positive thinking or wishful hoping. It's metaphysical law operating as precisely as gravity. What you recognize in consciousness must manifest as experience because consciousness is the only substance that exists. Everything you see in the physical world is consciousness appearing as form. When you recognize spiritual truth about health, wealth, or relationships, that truth becomes your demonstrated reality. Tonight, your prayer life begins its complete transformation. Tomorrow morning, catch yourself before saying, "I need," in any form. Replace it with, "I recognize," and watch how this simple shift changes everything about your spiritual practice and your daily experience of life. If these transformation stories inspire you to change your prayer life forever, like this video to help others find these life-changing teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom that actually works, and comment. Which healing journey resonated most deeply with your own spiritual path? Beyond removing need, Joel taught specific recognition techniques that amplify prayer power exponentially. The first is what he called the treatment of being. Instead of asking God to make you become something different, you recognize what you already are in spiritual truth. This eliminates the time delay between prayer and manifestation because you're not waiting for change. You're acknowledging present reality. For health challenges, don't pray, "God, make me well." Instead, recognize, "I am the perfect life of God expressing. Divine health is my eternal nature." For financial struggles, avoid, "God, give me abundance." Acknowledge, "I am the infinite supply of spirit made manifest. Prosperity flows through me as naturally as breath." You're not becoming these things. You're recognizing your eternal spiritual identity. This isn't denial of human appearance or positive thinking. It's alignment with spiritual reality. Joel taught that what appears to human sight as sickness, lack, or discord has no existence in God's creation. These appearances are like mirages in the desert. They seem real to physical sense but have no actual substance. When you recognize truth about your spiritual nature, the false appearance has no choice but to dissolve into its native nothingness. This is why recognition prayer works faster than petition prayer. You're not trying to create something new but remembering something eternal. Joel's second technique is the prayer of already. Instead of praying for future change, recognize present perfection. God exists only in the eternal now. There's no yesterday or tomorrow in divine consciousness. When you pray already, you align with God's timeless perspective where everything is complete and perfect right now. Don't say, "God will heal me tomorrow." Recognize, "God is healing me now." Don't pray, "Abundance will come next week." Acknowledge, "Abundance is here now, expressing perfectly as my life." This isn't future hoping based on human timeline. It's present recognition of eternal spiritual reality. This technique dissolves the illusion of time that keeps prayers seemingly unanswered. In God's consciousness, your healing, your abundance, your perfect relationships already exist completely. Time is a human concept that has no reality in spiritual dimension. Recognition prayer allows you to experience now what has always been true in divine mind. Most people pray in future tense because they're trying to create something that doesn't exist yet. But in spiritual truth, everything you need already exists perfectly in God's eternal now. Recognition prayer brings you into alignment with this eternal present where all good is already yours. The third technique Joel taught is impersonal recognition. Most people make prayer personal, focusing on their individual needs and desires. But Joel discovered that impersonal prayer, recognizing truth for all being everywhere, creates more powerful healing than personal treatment ever could because it taps into cosmic consciousness rather than individual will. Instead of, "I am healed," try, "Perfect health is the only reality everywhere present." Rather than, "I have abundance," recognize, "Infinite supply is expressing throughout all creation." When you lift prayer above personal concern into universal truth, you tap into the cosmic power that sustains all existence instead of limiting yourself to personal energy. This impersonal approach eliminates the ego from prayer completely. You're not trying to improve your personal situation through spiritual manipulation. You're acknowledging the spiritual perfection that includes but transcends individual experience. This alignment with cosmic consciousness multiplies healing power beyond anything personal prayer can achieve. Joel proved that when you recognize truth impersonally, it benefits you personally because you're included in all being everywhere. But the power comes from cosmic consciousness rather than personal desire, making the healing more permanent and complete. Joel's final recognition technique is the prayer of gratitude for what is. Most people thank God for what they hope to receive in the future. But mystical prayer thanks God for what already exists perfectly in spiritual reality right now. You're grateful for present perfection, not future possibility. This gratitude is based on recognition, not hope. Thank God for the health that is already perfect in divine consciousness expressing as your body. Be grateful for the abundance that is already flowing as your spiritual nature. Acknowledge with thanksgiving the love that is already the substance of your being and all your relationships. This transforms prayer from requesting into receiving. You're no longer asking for something to happen in the future. You're grateful for what has always been true in the eternal now. This gratitude opens your consciousness to experience the spiritual perfection that exists right now, waiting for recognition rather than creation. Gratitude based on recognition rather than hope creates an immediate shift in consciousness. When you're genuinely thankful for spiritual truth that already exists, you align with that truth and it becomes your demonstrated experience naturally and effortlessly. But what happens when recognition prayer seems to fail? When you recognize health but symptoms persist? When you acknowledge abundance but bills remain unpaid? Joel encountered these challenges throughout his 40-year ministry and developed specific approaches for stubborn appearances that seem to resist spiritual treatment. First, understand that spiritual treatment works in consciousness, not in the physical world directly. The healing happens in your awareness of truth, then translates into visible form through natural law. Sometimes there's a gap between consciousness change and appearance change. This doesn't mean prayer failed. It means more recognition work is needed to establish truth firmly in awareness. Joel taught that persistent problems require persistent recognition. If human belief in sickness is deeply rooted, it takes consistent spiritual knowing to dissolve it completely. Don't judge prayer effectiveness by immediate physical change. Judge it by your growing sense of peace, confidence, and unshakable spiritual knowing that truth is working. The healing is happening in consciousness first, always. Physical manifestation follows consciousness change as naturally as day follows dawn. Trust the process even when appearances seem unchanged initially. Consciousness is the only power, and consciousness change always produces corresponding experience change. Second, check for hidden need consciousness that secretly sabotages recognition prayer. You might say, "I recognize perfect health," while secretly thinking, "I hope this works because I really need healing desperately." That underlying need consciousness completely negates the recognition because consciousness responds to what you really believe, not what you say. Joel emphasized that recognition prayer requires complete abandonment of human will and personal desire. You can't recognize spiritual truth while holding on to human desire for specific outcomes. Either you're trusting God's perfection completely, or you're still trying to manipulate circumstances through spiritual techniques disguised as prayer. This surrender doesn't mean passive acceptance of problems or giving up practical action. It means active recognition of spiritual truth regardless of appearances, combined with whatever human action feels guided. You acknowledge God's perfection so completely that human appearances lose their power to disturb your consciousness of truth. Mixed consciousness creates mixed results. Pure recognition. Consciousness creates pure demonstration. Check your motives. Are you recognizing truth because it's true, or because you want something to change? The first approach works. The second creates resistance and delay. Third, Joel discovered that some conditions require group recognition rather than individual prayer. Certain deeply embedded beliefs in collective human consciousness respond better to multiple people recognizing truth simultaneously. This isn't because God needs convincing. It's because collective recognition dissolves collective belief in limitation more effectively than individual treatment. When individual recognition feels insufficient after consistent practice, seek others who understand Joel's principles. Form small groups dedicated to mutual recognition prayer. Don't discuss the problem or symptoms, only acknowledge the spiritual truth that makes the problem impossible. This collective recognition creates powerful healing atmospheres where limitation cannot maintain itself. Many of Joel's most dramatic healings happened through group recognition work, where multiple people acknowledge the same spiritual truth. Multiple consciousness recognizing the same truth creates an atmosphere of spiritual knowing, where false appearances simply dissolve naturally. This group work isn't about combining personal wills for stronger results. It's about establishing collective consciousness in spiritual truth rather than human belief. When several people know the same truth simultaneously, that truth becomes irresistible in manifestation. Finally, remember that recognition prayer isn't about overcoming problems. It's about recognizing their unreality in God's creation. Problems seem real to human sense perception, but they have no existence in divine consciousness. Your recognition work dissolves belief in their reality rather than fighting against their appearance. Joel taught that every problem is ultimately a case of mistaken identity. You've forgotten your spiritual nature and accepted a human sense of limitation instead. Recognition prayer reminds you who you really are in God's creation. Perfect, whole, complete, and eternally provided for by infinite love and wisdom. This understanding transforms your entire relationship with challenges completely. You're not trying to fix yourself or improve your conditions through spiritual manipulation. You're remembering your divine identity, where all problems are revealed as mere shadows with no real substance or power. When you truly understand that problems have no reality in God's consciousness, fighting them becomes unnecessary. You simply recognize truth and false appearances fade naturally because they had no real existence to begin with. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak directly to your heart and spiritual hunger, like to support this content reaching others who need it, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices that actually work, and comment. Which specific obstacle are you ready to transform through recognition right now? Advanced recognition prayer requires what Joel called living in the secret place of the Most High. This means maintaining continuous awareness of spiritual truth regardless of external circumstances. You're not just praying occasionally when problems arise. You're dwelling permanently in recognition consciousness as your normal state of being. Throughout the day, catch yourself when human thinking takes over your awareness. The moment you notice worry, fear, doubt, or sense of lack creeping into consciousness, immediately return to recognition. Only God's perfection is present here. Divine love and wisdom are governing this situation perfectly. Don't fight the human thoughts. Simply recognize the spiritual truth that makes them impossible. This continuous recognition gradually establishes what Joel called the consciousness of Christ as your normal state of awareness. Problems lose their ability to disturb you because you're established in unshakable knowing of spiritual truth. This is how the great mystics lived in such consistent peace and power, regardless of external circumstances. The goal isn't to achieve perfect recognition consciousness overnight, but to catch yourself more quickly when you slip into human thinking. Each time you return to recognition, you strengthen your spiritual awareness and weaken belief in limitation. In business situations, apply recognition prayer by acknowledging divine intelligence as the only presence guiding all decisions and outcomes. Instead of worrying about competition, market conditions, or financial results, recognize that infinite wisdom is expressing perfectly through every business situation. God's intelligence knows no failure, confusion, or lack of supply. Before important meetings or presentations, don't pray for success or favorable outcomes. Recognize that divine wisdom is already present as the substance of everyone involved. Acknowledge that perfect right action is unfolding naturally for the highest good of all. Trust that God's intelligence expresses itself through you and all others in ways that benefit everyone involved. This approach eliminates anxiety about business outcomes because you're relying on divine intelligence rather than human planning alone. You still take appropriate action and prepare thoroughly, but your confidence comes from spiritual recognition rather than personal effort or manipulation of circumstances. Business becomes a spiritual practice when you recognize divine intelligence operating through every transaction, every relationship, every challenge. Success flows naturally because you're aligned with cosmic wisdom rather than competing with human limitation. For relationship challenges, recognition prayer acknowledges divine love as the only presence between you and all others. Instead of trying to change people or improve relationships through human effort, recognize that perfect love is already the spiritual reality of every interaction. This recognition in your consciousness creates space for everyone's spiritual nature to express more freely. When someone seems difficult, hostile, or unloving, don't pray for them to change their behavior. Recognize the spiritual truth of their being. Acknowledge that divine love is their real nature, regardless of human appearance or temporary behavior. This recognition in your consciousness dissolves the belief in separation that creates conflict. Joel taught that what you recognize about others determines exactly how they appear to you and behave in your presence. When you consistently recognize divine love as their reality, human discord loses its power to manifest in your experience. Relationships transform through your recognition of spiritual truth, not through human effort or manipulation. The person doesn't have to know about your recognition work. Consciousness is one, so when you know truth about someone, they feel it and respond accordingly. Love recognized becomes love expressed naturally and effortlessly in all interactions. In financial matters, recognition prayer acknowledges infinite supply as the spiritual substance underlying all material provision. Instead of worrying about money, investments, or economic conditions, recognize that divine abundance is the only reality underlying all material appearance. God's supply knows no limitation, depletion, recession, or insufficiency. When bills arrive or financial pressure mounts, don't panic about payment or income. Recognize that infinite supply is already present as the substance of every apparent need. Acknowledge that divine intelligence knows how to provide in ways that human thinking cannot imagine. Trust completely in spiritual supply rather than human resources alone. This doesn't mean avoiding practical financial responsibility, but it transforms your consciousness from lack to abundance. You take appropriate action from a foundation of spiritual confidence rather than human desperation. This recognition consciousness attracts supply through channels you never expected while opening new opportunities. Money becomes a symbol of divine supply rather than a limited resource. When you recognize infinite abundance as your spiritual nature, material provision flows naturally because there's nothing in consciousness to restrict or limit it. Joel's ultimate teaching is that recognition prayer eventually transforms into what he called the practice of the presence of God. You no longer need to pray because you live in continuous recognition of God's presence as your being. Every breath becomes recognition, every moment becomes treatment, every experience becomes spiritual practice. This doesn't happen overnight. It's the fruit of consistent recognition practice over months and years. Gradually, the gap between prayer time and daily life disappears completely. You maintain conscious awareness of spiritual truth continuously, regardless of what you're doing, where you are, or what appears to be happening. In this advanced consciousness, problems lose their ability to form in your experience because you're established in continuous recognition of perfection. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming simply don't register as real because your consciousness is permanently anchored in spiritual truth rather than human appearance. This is the consciousness Jesus demonstrated, unshakable awareness of spiritual reality that transformed every situation into an opportunity for divine love and power to express itself naturally and effortlessly. Living in recognition consciousness means seeing through the appearance world to spiritual reality in every situation you encounter. When others see sickness, you recognize perfect health. When others see lack and limitation, you acknowledge infinite supply. When others see discord and conflict, you know divine harmony as the only truth. This isn't denial of human experience or naive optimism. It's recognition of spiritual reality that transcends and transforms human appearance. You respond appropriately to human needs while maintaining unshakable awareness that spiritual perfection is the only reality. This double vision is the mark of advanced mystical consciousness. People around you begin to experience healing and supply simply through contact with your recognition consciousness. You become what Joel called a transparency for God, a clear window through which spiritual truth shines into human experience without obstruction or personal agenda. Your very presence becomes a healing influence because your consciousness is established in truth rather than belief. You don't try to heal people. Your recognition of their spiritual perfection does the work naturally and effortlessly without personal effort. The world desperately needs people who understand and practice recognition prayer consistently. Every war, every disease epidemic, every financial crisis stems from collective belief in separation from God and each other. When enough people maintain recognition consciousness, these collective problems will dissolve naturally through spiritual truth overcoming human belief. You're not just learning prayer technique for personal improvement, you're being trained as a spiritual healer for this age of transition. Every time you choose recognition over need, you're contributing to the healing of human consciousness. Every moment you remember spiritual truth, you're helping awaken humanity to its divine identity. Joel's teachings aren't meant for personal benefit alone. They're designed to establish God's kingdom on earth through recognition consciousness. As you master these principles through consistent practice, you become part of the spiritual solution to every problem facing humanity today. Your individual consciousness work affects the collective consciousness of humanity. When you know truth, you're helping establish that truth in mass consciousness, where it becomes available to all who are ready to receive it. Tonight marks your graduation from need-based prayer into recognition consciousness. You now know the word that destroys prayer and the mystical replacement that unleashes miraculous power in every area of life. This knowledge transforms you from spiritual beggar into conscious heir of divine inheritance. You're no longer asking for what you need. You're recognizing what you already are. Tomorrow morning, begin your day with recognition prayer before getting involved in human activities. Throughout each day, catch yourself before saying need in any form and replace it with acknowledgement of present spiritual perfection. Within weeks, you'll notice profound changes in your experience as recognition consciousness establishes itself as your natural state. Remember, you're not trying to become spiritual through these practices. You're recognizing what you already are in God's eternal creation. This recognition is your prayer, your treatment, your path to demonstrating the same healing consciousness that Jesus, Joel Goldsmith, and all great mystics have revealed as humanity's true nature. The journey from need to recognition is the journey from human limitation to divine power. Welcome to your new life in spiritual consciousness, where everything you need is already yours because you are already everything God is. If your spiritual understanding has expanded permanently through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video to help others discover this life-changing truth. Subscribe for more transformative teachings that actually work, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your commitment to this new path of recognition consciousness.